This is our very first Gen Explained podcast, and we talk about everything from Gen X to Gen Z. Today, I'm talking about that bridge that I never should have burned. I was a pretty good student in law school. I was in the top 10% of my class, and my first year, I won the American Jurisprudence Award for Legal Research and Writing. And that was kind of a big deal. So my second year, I was asked to compete to write for the Law Review. Now, if you don't know what Law Review is, most law schools have a law review, and that is a compilation of papers written by the students, and only the best students get to write for Law Review. And if you are published in a law review book, you get to use that pretty much for the rest of your life on your resume because you're a published author. It's prestigious, and it's very helpful when you're looking for jobs in the legal field. And other lawyers use law review of various schools to write their own papers and to even make arguments in court. So it's a good thing. And I was excited about it. And I thought, the world was my oyster. But my editor, Dawn, didn't actually ask me to write anything while I was on Law Review. What she asked me to do was cite and source check for other people's papers about 30 to 40 hours a week. So a few weeks of that went by, and I told her I really wasn't happy with the assignments and I'd like to write. And she was like, eventually. So right around week 6 or 7 of cite and source checking 30 to 40 hours a week, I decided I just wasn't going to do it anymore. And I wasn't even going to tell anybody. I was just going to miss the deadline, and whatever happened, happened. And so that's what happened. I missed a deadline. I got a call from Dawn, and I picked up the wall phone in our apartment in Queens. Gen Z, have no idea what I'm talking about, but we used to have these phones that would hang on the wall and you could answer them. And she was angry, and I told her, hey, look, this is BS. I'm not doing it anymore. You can take your cites and your sources and shove them where the sun don't shine, and that I quit Law Review. What's the big deal, right? I finished up law school. I graduated with honors. And I was looking for a job in my field of trusts and estates. And I saw that this very fancy old New York bank was hiring. And I applied for the job. So they invited me for an interview. And I met with the vice president and manager of the department. And his name was Mike. He's a great guy. And we talked about so many things. And he asked me what I like to do for fun. And I said, I like to fish. And he asked me where I go fishing. And I said, the Peconic Bay in the Hamptons. And it so happens that's where he went fishing. And so we talked about catching bluefish and how great it is to put bluefish in the Italian gravy. And we hit it off. And I said, oh my gosh, I think I got this job. Well, he said I needed to interview with one more person before I left that day. So he takes me over to another office, and he opens the door, and sitting behind the desk is Dawn. And I probably had a look of shock on my face. But she smiled and she laughed, and I tried to. And she asked me several questions and told me about the position and her experience at the bank. And she said, Mike had asked me if I knew you when you applied, for this interview. And I said I did. And I told him what happened. And he asked me, how do I feel about that? And I said, well, you need to be a little bit tough in this job. And you do. Because when you're dealing with millions of dollars that are going to very wealthy families, you can't always do what they want you to do immediately. So I said to Mike that I think you'd be a good fit. And she said to me, and you are a good fit. So I got that job. And wouldn't you know it, a few years later, Dawn wound up living down the street from me in Westchester, New York. And this was after I had left the bank. I stayed a little over 2 years. And I moved on to bigger and better things. But man, I got to tell you guys, this is a small, small world. Be careful which bridges you burn.